So we are talking about what is conscious recovery today, and I want to start by going a little bit deeper into what was introduced in the reading, starting with my definition or my perspective on what addiction is. Because I don't know, you might be thinking, how would I relate to a conversation about recovery? Because people have said to me, I got your first book, but the second one doesn't apply to me because I'm not in recovery or I don't have an addiction. So let's break this down, everyone. Thank you for laughing. Right? So, if I have decided that someone, something, some chemical, some behavior outside of myself in some way is going to relieve something that feels separate, disconnected, broken within, and I use that repetitively, we might call that an addiction. Okay, so I wanted to start with that to recognize that I would say maybe, anyone relate? Maybe we have some kind of addiction? Maybe we're just addicted to our thoughts. Maybe I'm addicted to my point of view. Yeah. Maybe I'm addicted to my opinions. Right? And so that we see in our culture running around right now. So I wanted to start by saying that because I thought it was important to open the conversation. Sandra, hi. Oh my God, you're so beautiful. Good to see you. That just warmed my heart. Okay, so meanwhile, back at the talk, I'm going to start with telling my own story because I think it really will inform how I've come to not only my perspective of what addiction is and why we as a culture, in particular as Americans, why we're highly addicted right now. I came into this world filled with joy. And I remember being really young and being in my backyard. Do you remember those summer days that felt like an eternity? Now, I grew up in the era where we just left and we went out all day. And this is back in the day when I'm saying it this way because this is the way it was. The moms came to the front porch, lunchtime, kids, or the bells would ring, right? And we would all run to our houses and then we'd run right back out and spend the rest of the day. But I remember being a very young child and being in my backyard and mesmerized by life. Like just by a blade of grass. It felt like I could spend an hour just looking at that. It might have been 3 minutes, I don't know. But I was mesmerized by the magnificence of the world and what made life happen. Who or what created this? And how did this come to be? And I remember watching ants. I don't know what it was about those ants. They would make that long line and they would carry those and they would work together. I remember seeing that. And they would build this magnificent house. And I remember really being with, how did this come to be? So I have a memory of knowing very deeply the truth of who and what I was, or what I am. I remember feeling completely connected internally with my heart. My mother will often say that she experienced me as one of the happiest babies and toddlers she's ever seen. That I was always laughing. She also said, you were easy, I like that. Which, she would say that in front of my older sister, but that's a whole other conversation, which we might get into here in a moment. Actually, we will get into here in a moment. I also remember the day that experience of connection and open-heartedness came to an end. I remember sitting at my dining room table, and my mother and my two sisters were at the table. Dad wasn't home. That's part of my story. Dad wasn't home. I've done a lot of work with that. I love my father. And I had the experience of him not being there. There was a lot going on in my household that things looked really great on the outside. And I think we were really focused on things looking pretty good on the outside. We weren't talking about what was really going on. I remember at a very early age, thinking what people are saying, what people are doing, and the energy I'm feeling are completely incongruent. I don't think my 6-year-old knew what incongruent was. But I was like, this is crazy, right? Something's up here. So I remember at age 7 having a moment where I closed off and shut down. And I remember like it was yesterday. I had this sensation of something coming in front of my heart and my whole beingness kind of withering. And what I know now, looking back, is that that was a mechanism within me that was there to protect me, that was protecting me from more pain, the pain of the world. I remember when I first discovered that there was racism, and that there was war, and that there was hunger, and I didn't understand. I couldn't, my little being, my little spiritual being, didn't understand how this could possibly be. And it was in conflict with being mesmerized by that blade of grass. And I remember hearing the tall people, that we call adults, saying things that seemed so counter to the truth. So counter to the truth. So I walked around from age 7 until age 13 when I discovered drugs and alcohol. I walked around feeling broken, feeling separate from, feeling damaged. I started developing beliefs about myself that there must be something wrong with me. And when I discovered drugs and alcohol at age 13, I found relief. And it was I was like I was back there with that blade of grass. Okay? And maybe I was, if you know what I'm saying, okay? But the reason I share that is I wanted to say right here, there's nothing wrong or right about any of this. As a matter of fact, in my own experience and perspective on addiction, addiction's not the problem, it is the solution. It was helping me feel something different, or helping me feel less. And it worked beautifully for a very short amount of time. But then I kept doing it. And then if it quit working, so I thought, well, maybe I should try more, and more, and more, and more. So we know where the story's going, right? And I ended up in all of those things that I thought drugs and alcohol were bringing me turned. When it once brought me connection, it started to bring isolation. It helped me to feel more comfortable in my own skin, and I started feeling less comfortable. So somehow there was some point, and I don't know what it was, where it seemed like it turned on me, and I was getting the opposite of what it did in the beginning. So I got sober. I'm very grateful for this. I got sober at age 20. So that was 32 years ago. 32 years ago. I don't know how old I am. I'm actually, anyway. So that was 32 years ago, and it's hard for me to imagine that's true. And I want to share for a moment, because I want to talk about something that Helen spoke to, a couple of things. One, when I got sober, I met a woman that changed my life. And I want to speak about her and honor her for a moment. She made her transition in 1998. And the reason that I'm sharing this is it's interesting the way that we can really be in an energy field. During the 20-minute meditation, she really came into my heart, and I was really aware that she was here with me. And she demonstrated to me in a really powerful way what was possible as a human being, of being the light of the world. She was this magnificent light that impacted me simply by her presence. And in many ways, the foundation of my entire life and my entire teaching, if you will, and my entire perspective around spirituality and addiction comes from her. And what I want to say about that is, I had an intellectual understanding that people didn't really die. And I really have an experience of that now, because she feels as with me as ever. I do miss being able to pick up the phone and talk to her. So I want to honor her, and I want to say that she said something really interesting to me. Toward the end of her life, she said, you're really extroverted. And I am so grateful, because you are going to be able to take this message to a lot more people because of that. She was very introverted. Her gift was sitting with someone one-on-one. She would no more stand up here and do this. I mean, no way. She had this beautiful heart, this beautiful light, and she impacted people simply by her presence. And so at that moment when she said that to me, it was as if she had given me the call.
Mission.
Yeah, the mission. She didn't say it this way, but she said, basically, your purpose is now to take this message out and share it with the world. And the reason I wanted to say that for a moment, in this moment, is that our personality can serve spirit. This isn't about getting rid of our ego. This is about using our own personality to deliver a message into the world, whatever that is, in whatever way that is for each of us individually. So that's sort of the opening to the whole conversation about what is conscious recovery. I started working in the addiction treatment field a decade ago, and I quickly realized that most approaches to addiction, two things stood out to me. One, they were treating symptoms and behaviors without getting down to the deeper root causes of what was driving the addictive behavior. And the other one, and this is fundamental, they were viewed, and I say they, it's the Western medical model. What are your symptoms? How do I help you get rid of them? What they were looking at, when they were looking at the person that had the addiction, they were looking at what is broken here and how can I help fix you or fix that. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been in New Thought for 20 years. Mm-hmm. This paradigm is so limited because we know now, even science is catching up with what the mystics have been saying for 2,000 years, right? What Jesus came to teach, what Buddha and many other teachers, that the observer has a profound effect. And when I'm looking for what's broken, I will find what's broken. And being in the energy field of looking for what's broken will actually cause that person to look for what's broken. And so I started asking myself, how can I help shift this paradigm? How can I be, at least in a small way, a voice of something profoundly different than that? And so I started with a commitment that no matter what the behavior looked like, and anyone I was working with, I was going to look for the spiritual wholeness. I was going to honor the spiritual wholeness, and I was going to create a space for the spiritual wholeness to emerge, and profound things have happened since that moment. And I've been blessed now to write my book, Conscious Recovery. I have a workbook, and I've created a curriculum that's being facilitated in different treatment programs. And my vision for this world, and you're all witnessing it, I want my curriculum to be in at least 1,000 treatment programs before I leave this planet. Okay? Now, what is this conscious recovery? In my own journey and in working with people that are coming out of an addiction, I recognize that there are 3 deep root causes of addictive behavior. Now, I also honor there's a physical, mental, and emotional aspect. I'm really talking about the spiritual aspect. I am not in any way saying I have all the answers to addiction. That would be ridiculous and arrogant. I'm offering this different approach that can be used in a different way to look at another possibility of how we can assist someone with their addiction. So the 3 root causes of addictive behavior through this spiritual lens: unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And I want to spend a few minutes on each of those and say how I've come to that perspective. And then we're going to talk about how we create a space to start shifting that outer search to plugging back in. The way I frame it is we have our umbilical cord in our hand and we're trying to plug in to get fed somewhere. How's that working? It works great for a few minutes sometimes, right? Like the honeymoon phase. Isn't it fun? Oh, I'm so in love. And then all of a sudden, you're a human being, just like me. It's about 3 months in, I think. We live in a world that might identify trauma in a particular way. When I say trauma, you might think of someone coming back from a war or experiencing a horrific event, a loss of a parent as a child, physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse. And while all that is trauma, there's also other levels of trauma, spiritual trauma. When a human being is not seen as their essential self, when we receive messages of good and bad and right and wrong and competition, and you need to strive to get ahead in this world, when we receive messages that we're less than whole and perfect, that is a traumatic experience. Because we have been taught a lie about our essential nature. Don Miguel Ruiz, in his book, The Four Agreements, calls it the domestication of the human. And the reason I love that term is when we domesticate a horse, we call it breaking. We call it breaking their spirit. And so we come into this world, and here's just a small example, because it can be really subtle. Someone might say, well, I don't have trauma in my past. I had a very loving family. I was on the train. I think I told this story a few weeks ago. I was on the train, and there was this little boy wearing all this hockey gear, and he looked so filled with joy. And this woman on the train said, what are you doing? And he just, in great joy, he said, I'm riding a train. And she said, no, you're dressed in hockey gear. What are you doing? I'm riding a train. Isn't it cool? And so even that, where we're teaching someone, don't be here now. Yeah. Be future focused. We have a destination addiction in our culture. Once I get that degree, once I complete this grade, once I get that job, once I get that husband or wife, once I either have kids or don't, whatever. Do you hear the story? And then we get, toward the end of our life, or the evening of our life, where we start reflecting back. Did we even live any of that? Did we miss the whole event because we were so future focused? So even that is a traumatic experience because it's not innately who and what we are. If you look at a really small child, they feel their feelings deeply. They're present in the moment. They allow those feelings to move through them, and then they're back to joy. As Helen spoke to, when we have our emotional experience, I think it's interesting that you said, I know I'm supposed to be happy and joyful all the time. That's a deep program in our culture. Mm-hmm. But what if I'm supposed to grieve? And what if that's okay? What if it's okay for me to feel the sadness and actually move through that sadness? Because what happens is when I allow myself to really grieve, the joy of who and what I am is always there in the midst of that. It's the resistance to that grieving that causes suffering. That's why Buddha said, pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. Although I saw this great meme that said, I absolutely know I never said that, the Buddha. For sure, the Buddha said that, but it sounds great, right? Pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And I want to offer a little bit a different approach. At this level of our consciousness, pain is inevitable. At some point, we might move beyond the need for pain. But suffering is in the mind because we create a perspective that I shouldn't be feeling this. People shouldn't die.
Yes.
Right. And we honor that. We honor that and also honor the sadness of it. And maybe that is deep joy. Allowing ourselves to be back to our innate beingness, which allows us to be present with what's happening with myself and with the world. I think in New Thought, a lot of times we want to bypass all of that. We don't want to talk about racism. We don't want to talk about sexism. We don't want to talk about the stuff that's really happening. We want to say, everything's love and light. Let's not talk about that. Right? Well, maybe I'm speaking about my own journey. Because that's what I did for the first decade in New Thought. I thought, that is not there. I'm going to pretend it's not happening. And I'm going to use affirmations to affirm on what I am. But what if that is there? I'm going to use affirmations to recognize that I don't have to have that as my reality, and then I can be a beneficial presence in the midst of that, and I can be in the world making a difference with that, rather than pretending like it's not there. Now that, thank you, Sarah, now that is how we handle the world and our own journey. I'm going to pretend like I don't have sadness. I'm going to pretend like I don't have any trauma in my life. I'm going to pretend like everything is okay. That is addiction. I am not going to let you see me, and I'm not going to even let me see me. Because as long as I'm dancing as fast as I can, everything must be okay. But why do I keep feeling this way? Right? I work with people, one group of people I work with are people that have had every measure of what we would call success. And they're like, there's something missing. Right? Because there's not a deep connection. So what we know about that then is nothing outside of us can actually bring us that experience. And there's a paradox here. Because we also don't do it in a vacuum or in isolation. That's why we have community. So it's an interesting paradox, right? It's like, I don't need anyone or anything, is what I'm hearing myself say. It's all internal, and yet having the experience of a loving community helps me to experience the truth of who I am. So let's talk about spiritual disconnection for a moment. Again, we come into this world deeply connected with who and what we are. We receive messages that are counter to the truth. How many of you were taught in school, you are whole and perfect. You are the light of the world. You are amazing just the way you are. That's not what I was taught in first grade. It's not what I was taught at home. The greatest forgiveness that I've ever had to do and work with is to finally let my parents off the hook. Because all my parents were doing were running their programs that they received, and their parents, and their parents, and their parents. That, to me, was the fundamental turning point when I could reconnect with who and what I was or am. Because as long as I'm holding a story of someone else is responsible for my anything, my feeling, my life, as long as I'm holding that story, I will suffer. Because there is no, I worked with a client recently who said, if my mom could just apologize, I would be okay. Mom could just apologize. And is that even true? And apologize for what? Running from her, she was running her program. Most of the time, in a very well-meaning way. I remember my mom saying to me, which is no surprise, you were just so sensitive, I was afraid for you. You were just so open-hearted, I was afraid for you. The world was going to eat you alive. Now, she didn't go on to say, so I needed to toughen you up, but if she had that perspective, there must have been something there. I need to prepare you for the world so that you don't get hurt. It's valid and it's damaging. So we often disconnect from our essential self, and then we develop this third root cause of addiction, which is toxic shame, the belief that I'm broken. We know the difference between guilt and shame. Many of us, guilt is, I believe I've done something wrong. Shame is, I believe I am wrong. Brene Brown, a wonderful person speaking about shame right now, and I'll go back to John Bradshaw, who was one of the kind of preeminent pioneers in talking about shame, and shame as a root cause of a lot of the issues in our culture and in our addictions. Brene Brown said that there are three things that must be in the petri dish for shame to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. So not only do I feel broken, but I'm not going to let you know I feel broken. Right? I'm going to pretend like everything's great. That's the addiction. So enough about the root causes of addiction. Do you feel the energy in the room? Just feel into that. Let's talk about how we move into what I call, recovery is an interesting word. I was sitting there in meditation. Recover. Are we recovering something? No, we're uncovering. We're uncovering and unlearning and remembering the deepest truth of who and what we are. That is recovery to me. Coming back to our own wholeness, our own perfection. So in my book, Conscious Recovery, I identify the most important first step in the recovery process. And again, that word recovery may not work for everyone if you don't identify that you're in recovery. All I mean is returning to a place of spiritual wholeness where I don't need or strive or cling to something outside of myself to try to feel better. Right? Even if that's like, let me turn the channel until I find something. I mean, look at the obsession with reality TV. We are addicted to drama right now in our culture. And I think it's always been that way, but it's just so 24/7 now. So creating safety is the first important step. And that's external and internal safety. How do I surround myself with environments like Agape Bay Area where it's safe? And what do I mean by safety? I mean it's safe to be who and what we are. Both from a spiritual perspective of spiritual wholeness, because there are places that that's not okay. How many times, can you walk into every group you know and walk in and say, "Hi everyone, I'm the light of the world." And also, "Hi everyone, I'm hurting today. I'm feeling sad, I'm grieving. I'm honoring that I, on the human level, am losing someone in my life, and I feel really sad." Authentic, intentional community is, to me, the most important first step of us moving back to a place of wholeness, away from an addicted life and into a life of deep love and connection. Because when we have that external safety in relationships and groups, we can begin to work on what's really important, and that's that internal safety. Many of us have been running from ourselves for so long, we don't even know what it means to allow ourselves to be with ourselves. There's no surprise that we are a highly medicated culture. And one of the things that I notice in working in the addiction treatment field is the primary, and this is going to be way overly simplified, but that's okay. The primary characteristic of someone struggling with addiction is I just can't be present with myself and feel this right now. Whatever that is. And so I need to do this. And so recovery is like, let me create a space of inner safety where it's okay. Because anxiety is not a feeling. Anxiety is a strategy. And it's an unconscious strategy because it doesn't feel safe to be in my own body. And then we medicate that instead of saying what's underneath it. And I'm not speaking, by the way, for the record, I'm not saying there's anything inherently right or wrong about medication, but it's happened at such a high rate that we might be missing what's really going on. Right? And what's that existential crisis that's happening where I just can't be present in my own body, in my own skin? And then I view addiction as a brilliant strategy. As I also view anxiety as a brilliant strategy. And the reason I use that, some people get a little pushback on that, like, I read your book, I love everything, but what's that brilliant strategy thing? It is not brilliant what I did to myself using heroin. That was not brilliant. And so we want to frame it, I want to ask the question, what if I were to say it was brilliant at the time, or it was the best I could possibly do? My 7-year-old self, the best I could do is put a wall around my heart. For a 7-year-old, that's pretty darn brilliant. But the issue was, it was protecting me from pain, but it was also protecting me from love and connection. And so if we view addiction and these strategies, conscious or unconscious strategies, as brilliant, we can start asking the question, are they still serving us? Are they still working? Is this strategy still serving me? Is it helping me to feel more love and connection, or is it causing more isolation and fear? So the next important step in the recovery process is unlearning. How do we begin to unlearn all the beliefs, all the programs, all the stories, all the ideas about ourselves? Because see, here's the thing, we don't need to grow spiritually. We need to grow an awareness of the spiritual truth that we already are. It's like right here, the light is right under there. The bushel, right? Hidden by the programs. Hidden by the beliefs, the strategies, the ideas. So as we move into recovery, we begin to unlearn, and then we can move into practicing some of the principles like forgiveness, compassion, understanding. And those are practices. Practice, there's a reason it's called a spiritual practice. It took time for me to develop the, as Reverend Michael says, the discipline to do my spiritual practice. Because who wants discipline? I mean, I don't. I'm a rebellious second child, so. What I want to say in closing is thank you, first of all, for allowing me to bring a conversation about addiction to Agape Bay Area, because I realized in my own journey I was keeping my world separate. Like, oh no, I do this addiction work over here, and then I'm a minister over here. And one day I woke up with some help. There was a minister that said, no, I want you to come to my center to talk about addiction because people need that help, right? And so I'm recognizing now that it's being integrated. And we're recognizing now, just as the conversation we were talking about, where we're not looking away from Me Too and Black Lives Matter and the things happening in our world, we're doing that internally as well. New Thought is moving into a new era, and Agape is at the forefront of that. When we were at Revelation, we had a ministers' meeting, about 20 ministers, maybe more. And the conversation was, as Agape, as a movement, how do we make an impact on the planet? How do we, through consciousness and through conscious action, through consciously being who and what we are, not look away from what's happening in the world, but embrace what's happening in the world? How can we be a presence for that? When we have young African American kids being shot 2 blocks away apart, or stabbed, I'm sorry, I don't remember. That's happening. We don't need to look away anymore. We're on the forefront of saying, how can we make a difference in the world without getting into the us and them, the good and bad, and the fight? Because that creates more of it, right? How can we be a beneficial presence on the planet? How can each of us do our own inner work? Because here's the thing. If I haven't made peace with me, I cannot possibly make peace with you. It's not possible. Otherwise, I will struggle and I will fight. And I will have a lot of beliefs about what you did to me until I move out of my own victimhood and into my own power, not force, but power. Because in a lot, to really wrap it up, there's a big conversation in a lot of recovery circles about powerlessness. And what I really want to invite is that many of us have given our power away. I'm not powerful. I'm broken. You have the power. This is about us moving into a place of owning and reclaiming our power. And again, not an individual egoic power, but the deepest truth of who and what we are. Then we can be in the world in a profoundly new way. I don't blame anyone for my experience. And because of that, because of our own transformation, Lao Tzu, 2,500 years ago, said the greatest offering, I'm paraphrasing, the greatest gift you can give the world is that of your own transformation. The greatest gift I can give the world is that of my own transformation. And that transformation is releasing every idea of lack, limitation, and separation, and moving back into a place of spiritual wholeness. And as more and more of us do that, it has a profound effect on consciousness all over the globe. Not as a ripple effect, but as an instantaneous shift. And that's what's happening on the planet. And as more and more of us wake up, it may appear that the counter to that shows up. Because I don't know about you, but in my own journey, when I was making a shift, that old part of me always wants to like, no, don't change. That happens collectively as well. So we're in the midst of a wave of change in consciousness that each of us are a part of. And so what I want to ask in closing is, are you ready to answer the call to be the love in the world that is needed at this time?
Yes.
So we say yes to the call.